moving down the line, I want to give people who haven't had a chance to ask questions the full floor first. Yeah.
Going back to your example, lacking a complete economic collapse like that in Cuba, how would you suggest a city like Sacramento, who's really reliant on cars for transportation, there's an intersection of so many freeways, how would you suggest that we green our economy? Because I know I can't get anywhere without a car. So how would you suggest a car-dependent city or state like us?
Right. And clearly we need a plan with many different options, because there are, you know, cities like Sacramento that are very highway dependent, and that, do you have that public transportation at all inside Sacramento? So minimal?
Not very good.
They've been cutting back on it, doing exactly the wrong thing, and it's probably getting more expensive at the same time that they're cutting back and all that, right? So I think, you know, there's so much that can be done at the federal level to provide incentives and support so that cities move in the right direction. So that we're providing matching funds, or actually providing more federal funds for alternative transportation, which is really the way that we need to go so we can phase out automobiles. We're not going to do anything overnight, and part of also what we need to do is create clean options for automobiles, so that we have electric cars that are being fueled by solar and wind and so on, so that we can clean up our cars at the same time that we build the the high-speed rail between cities, and that we build affordable, clean, efficient public transportation where you can also bring your bicycle, so that we make it possible for people to really get around. In Copenhagen, in the 1950s, they were thinking ahead, and they built bike paths that were separated from streets and that are safe to bike. So about half of their commuter traffic now takes place by bike in Copenhagen. And so there's some really good models that we should provide incentives for and make possible. Because when we do that, you know, it's like all these other benefits just kick in. So as people start to be able to use public transportation and walk and active kinds of transit, we get healthier. I mean, that's how most people throughout human history have gotten their exercise. They don't go to a health club, you know, which are often unaffordable and hard to get to and inconvenient. That's not how you build health into, or public health into, a community. You want to have it built into how we get places. So by having kind of a mixed transportation thing where you can be active as you get where you're going and use public transportation as part of that. And plus then you're opening up the roads, so then people start to use them more for biking. A lot of people don't bike now because it's dangerous. And how many of you use bikes to get where you're going? Some of you. And how safe do you feel? I mean, very safe. Do you have bike paths that are separated? Oh, that's awesome. Okay, that's really terrific, and what a credit to your city that you've been thinking to do that. How about local food? Is there much organic local food going on here too? The farmers markets, great. Yeah.
The co-op.
And co-ops, okay, terrific. All right, so let's keep moving down the line. You.
You were talking about
yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but really bringing home costs all of a sudden a lot of money, and then having to supply them with jobs, plus moving all the devastation we have caused in some parts of the country.
Exactly.
How would we deal with all of this?
Right. Those are all the right questions, and it turns out there's some very good solutions to them. So it turns out spending money on the military is not the most efficient way to create jobs. That for the same money that it costs, it's fairly expensive to train and maintain an active army. For the same amount of money, I think it's something like for every one soldier, you can employ 3 teachers. It's somewhere on that order. So we can actually, for the same money, create far more jobs doing things that build civil society and a better future, rather than things that tend to destroy civil society and create more problems that we just can't fight our way out of. You know, you can't fight your way out of hostilities. At some point the shooting has to end, and then you got to deal with, you know, the mess that you've created. So, I mean, the mess is a whole other problem into itself. How do you deal with the international consequences, over there? And one thing I'll just say briefly is that military solutions tend not to work, and what we often do is wind up courting the the various tribes that are warring with each other. So we make allegiances and alliances with people like Osama bin Laden. We trained him way back. So you can see how our policy of training up local warlords has really come back to haunt us, in the same way that our arms industry, which is another part of that economic conversion we have to think about. We bring money into the economy by selling weapons to these countries that then fight with each other, so we then have to spend a lot of money going there, to try to get involved in the fighting and prevent the worst dictator from taking over and the worst human rights abuses. It's a crazy system. We need to just stand it on its head and start converting those industries so that instead we are employing people doing things that build our future instead of tearing it down. And you're right, it will take a lot of work, but it can only be for the good. Next in line, okay, and I'm going to keep going to this side of the room, and then we'll come back if we can. Yeah, go ahead.
You suggested spending $650 million to fix the $17 million.
The 17 million jobs. Right, good.
Out of jobs.
Yes.
And also solving a variety of other problems. I'm just wondering, how do you plan to get that money? Because this country's about $16 trillion in debt.
That's right.
And I'm just wondering how you plan to collect this money while we've already been downgraded by Standard & Poor's. Right. And most people don't even trust our credit now.
Great. So let me just say one thing which is really, really hopeful and helpful right off the bat. And that is by moving from the healthcare system we have now to what's called a Medicare for all, or a single-payer system. Have people heard that mentioned? Does that ring a bell? Just raise your hand if that rings a bell. Okay, so some people know about it. It's a healthcare system like Medicare. Medicare before George Bush started really messing with it, but it's basically a healthcare system where you have complete choice. No insurance bureaucrat is telling you what doctor you can have or what medication you can have. It basically covers you, and you have a choice of your doctor, you have a choice of your hospital, etc. So it provides all those things that we want in a healthcare system. There's no bureaucrat who's controlling your healthcare, but it has one insurer. There's one insurance system, as opposed to thousands of insurance systems. So inside of Medicare, there are very low costs for the bureaucracy and the administration. It's a streamlined administration. Once you get out into the private sector, there are many different health insurance plans, and they all have their own set of rules. So we spend 30% of every healthcare dollar on the bureaucracy instead of on the healthcare. And it turns out that if you move to what we call a single payer, a single insurance system like Medicare, and we could do that simply by expanding Medicare. Right now you have to be 65. Instead we can make the age of eligibility conception, so it's like from the first moment of pregnancy, even before you're born, you're covered. So that Medicare now covers everybody. It basically gets rid of that bureaucracy, red tape, overhead, which is huge. Brings down the cost of healthcare essentially 30%, and it constrains the rising costs. So many economists point to this as like the elephant in the room for solving the budget crisis. If we simply convert to that system, the debt goes away. The other thing that can help, it'll take some time, but the debt begins to take care of itself. Because so much of our debt going into the future is the skyrocketing cost of healthcare. That skyrocketing goes away. The other thing that really helps is asking the rich to contribute their fair share, because they're not currently. Bringing the troops home, that brings a lot of money back as well. The other thing that brings money back, if you look at the course of our debt over time, and I don't know if you've looked at this in your political science classes at all, but our debt wasn't so bad until the economy crashed in 2008. And it was that loss of revenue with the crashing of the economy that really pitched us into this multi-trillion dollar debt. It was the crashing of the economy. So that's why the Green New Deal pays for itself, because it gets rid of the recession, it jumpstarts the economy so that money begins to circulate again. And we need to create a state bank as well so that the money actually flows, unlike through the private banking system where it tends to get hung up. But as money begins to flow and people go back to work, they're paying taxes. So the money comes back into the economy, and we've created the system by which that debt draws down year by year, and it will get paid off quickly. And that's what we need, you know, when you talk about investors and our bond ratings and all that. They need to see that there's a plan and that there is political consensus behind that plan. And that's what they look for. They don't look for it all being paid off overnight. They want to know that there's plan and that there is a political blueprint for getting there. Thank you. All right, continuing to move on now.
About the framing the economy.
Yeah.
Isn't it going to cost a lot of money to train people to go into scientific and engineering jobs, like with green energy, which can often be very complicated?
Right.
So we're going to have highly skilled, highly trained people coming from jobs which may have not been as highly demanded as much. So how do you plan to...
Right. Good question. I mean, these are all really great questions. Right. And that kind of also dovetails with this question about the cost of higher education and all that. But, you know, the really interesting thing is that when you compare what we spent to bail out the banks, we came up with $16 trillion basically overnight to bail out the bad guys who caused the problem. And these kinds of costs for helping to jumpstart the system, you know, first of all, these are investments in our future because they pay back. And let me just give you one example of that. After World War II, we had the GI Bill, which paid for higher education for our returning soldiers. And it was one of the best investments that Congress has ever made. And the numbers on this say that for every dollar we put into it as taxpayers, $7 came back to us in terms of a revitalized economy and revenues that came back in. And because every job that we convert from the old fossil fuel economy creates 3 jobs in the renewable energy economy, that's another way that we get a lot of people in on this. Not everyone is going to be a high-trained, you know, scientific researcher. A lot of green energy is about manufacturing, the green, you know, green production, the green, you know, solar and wind and the technology. A lot of it is rehabbing our buildings and doing basically construction work so that our buildings are weatherized and insulated and reducing our incredible building costs. It's food and buildings which are the biggest contributors to the carbon footprint. So there are ways we can create lots of jobs there without imposing high costs. Good question.
And we're actually out of it because the period's about to end. I just wanted to thank Dr. Jill Stein for coming.